Welcome back to Solentha Stories. Let's fuel your day with some intense passion and non-stop excitement. Grab your gear, we're moving into the story now.
He sneered that I was too poor, too beneath his standards to ever be worthy of the life he believed he deserved. He mocked my dreams and acted like I should feel lucky he chose me. When he pushed me down one time too many, I filed for divorce and walked away. Years later, after his life fell apart, he came back, only to see I'd risen far beyond him. His mother's voice on the phone was ice-cold and precise. "You were always going to be a poor investment, Sophie. Marcus deserves someone who can actually contribute to his future, not drag him down to your level." I sat alone in the apartment we used to share, divorce papers spread across the coffee table, listening to her explain exactly why I'd never been good enough for her son. "Frankly, we're relieved he's finally come to his senses. A social worker." She said it like it was a disease. "You have no idea how much explaining we've had to do at the club. Oh, Marcus married a girl whose mother cleaned houses. It's been mortifying." I should have hung up. Should have told her exactly what I thought of her and her country club friends. But I just sat there remembering the night I'd overheard Marcus say almost the exact same things. How I was beneath his standards. How he'd settled when he married down. 5 years later, when his entire world collapsed and he came crawling back, I made sure he understood something clearly. I hadn't been beneath him. He'd been beneath me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I got to that phone call, how I ended up sitting alone with divorce papers while my mother-in-law delivered her final judgment, you need to know how it all started. Because once upon a time, Marcus Whitfield made me believe our different worlds didn't matter. He made me believe love could bridge the gap between his country club family and my working-class roots. He made me believe a lot of things that turned out to be lies. I met Marcus 7 years before that phone call, in a dusty campus gymnasium that smelled like old basketballs and donated clothing. It was one of those charity drives where students volunteered for various reasons. Some genuine, most not. I was there because I volunteered at the local shelter every weekend, sorting donations and helping families who reminded me of my own. Marcus was there fulfilling fraternity service hours, dressed in casual wear that probably cost more than my entire monthly food budget. I noticed him immediately because he looked so completely out of place, standing in the middle of donation piles like someone had accidentally dropped him into the wrong world. When the volunteer coordinator assigned us to the same sorting station, I expected awkward silence or condescending small talk. Instead, he made me laugh within 5 minutes. "I have no idea what I'm doing," he admitted, holding up a sweater and examining it like it might bite him. "Is there a proper folding technique for donated clothes, or do I just wing it?" "Wing it," I said. "The families who need them won't care if the creases are perfect." He grinned at that, and something about his smile felt genuine in a way I wasn't used to from guys who looked like him. We spent the next 2 hours sorting clothes and talking about everything. He asked about my social work major with what seemed like real interest, not the polite tolerance most people showed when I explained I wanted to help foster kids and domestic violence survivors. He told me about his finance major with this self-deprecating humor, joking that he was preparing for a lifetime of making money move around on screens while contributing nothing meaningful to society. I found myself drawn to his charm, to the way he asked questions like he actually cared about the answers. He came from the kind of family that had a lake house they never used anymore, and took annual ski trips to Aspen. I came from a tiny town nobody's heard of, where my dad worked construction until his back gave out and my mom cleaned houses until arthritis made holding a mop unbearable. I got to college on a patchwork of scholarships, federal loans, and working 3 jobs simultaneously. Campus library during weekdays, weekend waitressing at a diner near campus, tutoring whenever I could squeeze it in. I was constantly exhausted, constantly calculating whether I could afford both textbooks and groceries that week. Marcus said my work ethic was inspiring. He said I had this raw authenticity people from his world didn't possess. He made my poverty sound almost romantic, like some character-building origin story he found fascinating rather than the grinding reality it actually was. Looking back now, sitting in that apartment with his mother's cruel words still ringing in my ears, I wonder if he saw me as a project from the start. Something humble he could elevate as proof of his own open-mindedness, his own ability to see value beyond wealth and status. But back then, sitting in that gymnasium folding donated sweaters, I just thought I'd met someone special. We started dating a few weeks later. Those college years felt easy in a way nothing before or since has felt. We'd study together in the library, him helping me with statistics I couldn't wrap my head around, me proofreading his papers because writing came naturally to me. We'd grab cheap food from campus vendors and eat sitting on the quad, talking about futures that seemed limitless and bright. He never made me feel poor during those years. When I said I couldn't afford to go somewhere, he'd just shrug and suggest something free instead. We hiked state park trails, attended free campus concerts, spent weekend afternoons just walking around the city talking about dreams and plans and everything we wanted to build together. I thought that version of Marcus was real. I thought the guy who didn't care about expensive restaurants or designer clothes was who he actually was, not just who he was pretending to be before his real life started. After graduation, our paths diverged in ways that should have warned me, but love makes you ignore warning signs until they're written in neon. I became a social worker, dedicating myself to foster care cases and domestic violence survivors. Work that fulfilled my soul in ways I couldn't explain but barely paid my bills. Marcus joined his father's investment firm with a starting salary that made my annual income look like spare change. The gap between us widened immediately, but I told myself it didn't matter because we loved each other. His parents made their opinions clear from the start. The engagement announcement happened at a country club dinner where I felt completely out of place. I'd worn my nicest dress, the one I saved for job interviews, and still felt underdressed among women in clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. His mother asked what my parents did professionally, her tone making it clear she already knew the answer wouldn't impress her. When I told her about my dad's construction work and my mom's house cleaning, the silence that followed felt like judgment crystallized in the air. His father cleared his throat and changed the subject to Marcus's career trajectory, and I sat there feeling invisible and small. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table and I thought he was showing support. Now I realize he was probably just hoping I wouldn't say anything else embarrassing. We got married in our mid-20s in a ceremony his parents funded and completely controlled. Guest lists full of their country club friends instead of my family. Flowers I didn't choose and colors I didn't pick. A venue that screamed wealth I didn't understand with ice sculptures and a 7-course meal and a string quartet that probably cost more than my parents' annual income. My mom cried during the ceremony. At the time, I thought it was just normal mother of the bride emotion. Looking back, I think she saw what I couldn't, that I was marrying into a family that would never accept me, that would spend years making me feel like I wasn't good enough. We moved into a small apartment his parents owned, paying below market rent that Marcus reminded me about whenever I suggested finding our own place. Why would we pay market rate somewhere else when we have this? He'd say, like I was being unreasonable for wanting independence. Those early years of marriage had a rhythm that somehow worked. He'd come home stressed from office politics and I'd listen while making dinner on our modest budget. I'd come home emotionally drained from separating abused children from their parents or helping terrified women escape violent partners, and he'd order takeout so I didn't have to cook. We fit together in this odd way. His ambition balanced by my groundedness. His connections complementing my compassion. I genuinely thought we were building something real, something that would last. Then Marcus got promoted to senior associate, and everything started shifting in ways I didn't want to see. I celebrated him like it was my own achievement. Made his favorite pasta dish, the one he'd loved since our dating days. Bought him a card that said I was proud of him. He glowed that entire evening, talking about corner offices and partnership tracks and futures that sounded bright and limitless. That weekend I suggested we celebrate by hiking this trail I'd been wanting to explore. Free, beautiful, the kind of thing we used to do when we were broke college students finding joy in simple pleasures. The look Marcus gave me made my stomach drop. Why would we go hiking when I just got promoted? He said like I'd suggested something offensive. Let's go somewhere that actually reflects this achievement. Somewhere that matters. We ended up at an overpriced steakhouse where Marcus spent the entire dinner name-dropping colleagues I'd never meet and asking the waiter if he knew who his father was. I sat across from him in my department store dress, watching him perform for invisible judges, and felt the first crack in the foundation of everything I thought we were. He talked about future vacations to places I couldn't afford, designer purchases that seemed unnecessary, networking events that apparently mattered more than the quiet life we'd built. The intensity felt desperate, like he was chasing something he couldn't quite name but needed desperately to catch. I told myself he was just excited. That this was temporary enthusiasm that would settle once the promotion novelty wore off. I had no idea I was watching the beginning of his transformation into someone I wouldn't recognize. Someone who would eventually look at me with contempt and tell his friend I was too poor to understand real ambition. But that night at the steakhouse, watching him perform wealth and status for strangers who didn't care, I felt something shift. Something fundamental. I just didn't know yet that it was the beginning of the end. The shift from excitement to obsession happened so gradually I didn't notice until it had completely consumed him. About 3 months after that steakhouse dinner, Marcus came home from work buzzing with an energy I'd never seen before. He'd been invited to a private meeting with Theodore Carmichael, one of the senior partners at his firm. "This is it, Sophie," he said, pacing our small living room like he couldn't contain himself. "Theodore doesn't meet with junior associates unless he sees potential. This could change everything." I should have been happy for him. Instead, I felt a knot forming in my stomach that I couldn't explain. Theodore Carmichael became the center of Marcus's universe almost overnight. Theodore was everything Marcus wanted to be. The corner office with city views, the brownstone in the neighborhood where old money lived, the wife who looked like she'd stepped out of a Society magazine spread. Theodore drove a car that cost more than most people's houses and vacationed in places I couldn't pronounce. Marcus started talking about Theodore constantly. At dinner, instead of asking about my day, he'd launch into detailed accounts of Theodore's investment strategies. On weekends, he'd watch videos about golf because Theodore played at an exclusive club. He started reading the same financial publications Theodore mentioned, ordering the same wine Theodore preferred, even changing the way he dressed to mirror Theodore's style. It was nauseating watching my husband transform into a fanboy of another man, studying Theodore's life like it was some blueprint for becoming worthy. "Theodore says the key to success is surrounding yourself with quality," Marcus announced one evening, looking around our apartment with this new critical eye that made me uncomfortable. "Quality people, quality things, quality experiences." I was washing dishes from dinner, pasta again because it was cheap and filling, when he said it. I turned off the water and looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means we need to elevate our standards," he said, gesturing vaguely at our modest furniture. "Look at this place, Sophie. Everything looks so cheap, so starter. How am I supposed to invite colleagues over when we're living like college students?" "We're paying off my student loans," I reminded him, keeping my voice calm. "And saving for a down payment. Remember? The plan we made together." Marcus looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "That plan was from before," he said slowly, like he was explaining something to a child. "Before I understood what real success looks like. Theodore and Vivian's place, you should see it. Real art on the walls. Furniture that makes a statement. Everything curated and intentional. The man I married would have laughed at people who measured their worth by furniture brands. This new Marcus measured everything by Theodore's standards, and I was failing every test. Things got worse when Vivian Carmichael started hosting dinner parties. Elaborate affairs at their brownstone where the guest list read like a who's who of the city's financial elite. Marcus was invited to one, and he came home that night transformed. "We need to do better," he said, walking through our apartment like he was seeing it for the first time. "Why don't we have real art? Why is all our furniture from discount stores? Why does everything look so temporary?" "Because we're being financially responsible," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "Because we're paying down debt and building savings. Because we're doing what actual adults do instead of living beyond our means." "You're so small-minded," he shot back, and the venom in his voice made me flinch. This is exactly what Theodore warned me about. People who don't understand ambition will always try to pull you down to their level. I stared at him, genuinely shocked. "Did you just call me small-minded for wanting to be financially responsible?" "I called you small-minded for refusing to see the bigger picture," he said. "For thinking that being comfortable in cheap furniture is something to be proud of." That's when the spending started. Designer suits appeared in our closet, still bearing price tags that made my breath catch. When I asked about them, Marcus waved me off, saying they were investments in his career. Then came the car, a luxury lease with monthly payments that were more than our rent. I discovered it by accident, opening a piece of mail I thought was a utility bill. When I saw the amount, I actually felt dizzy. "Marcus, we can't afford this," I said that evening, holding the lease agreement with shaking hands. "We can't afford not to," he countered. "Image matters in my industry. Theodore drives a similar model. People notice these things. People notice when you can't pay your bills too," I said, trying to stay calm. "We're already carrying credit card debt. This is going to bury us. That's when he exploded in a way that genuinely frightened me. You don't understand anything, he shouted, his face red with anger. I'm trying to build something here and you're dragging me down with your poverty mentality. This is why you'll never succeed. You're still thinking like someone from a trailer park. I grew up in a modest house, not a trailer park, but the insult was designed to wound, and it did. I felt tears burning behind my eyes but refused to let them fall. My salary is the problem? I asked quietly. The salary I earn helping abused children and domestic violence survivors? That's what's wrong here. Your salary is a joke, he said cruelly. You chose a poverty profession and now you expect me to live down to your level. Well, I won't do it. Theodore's right. Sometimes you have to leave people behind who can't keep up. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. Locked myself in our bathroom and sat on the floor, listening to him pace in the living room, still angry, still convinced he was right. Over the following weeks, expensive dinners became routine. Places where reservations required connections, where entrees cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Marcus would come home talking about which partners were there, who noticed him, who seemed impressed. Our savings account drained steadily. Credit card balances climbed. I tried multiple times to sit down with him and discuss our actual financial situation, but every conversation became a war. You're just jealous, he'd say. Jealous that I'm succeeding while you're stuck in the same dead-end job. I'm trying to keep us from drowning in debt, I'd reply, but he never listened. Then came the apartment purge. I started noticing things disappearing. Small things at first. The framed photo from our college graduation. The souvenir magnet from our modest honeymoon in the mountains. The thrift store bookshelf we'd spent an afternoon picking out together, laughing about our terrible furniture assembly skills. One day I came home to find our favorite picture missing from the hallway. It was from a hiking trip during our first year of marriage, both of us sweaty and happy and broke, grinning at the camera with a waterfall behind us. I found it shoved in a drawer in the bedroom along with 2 other photos from our early years together. Hidden like evidence of a crime. What happened to our pictures? I asked Marcus that evening. They looked childish, he said dismissively, not even looking up from his phone. I'm trying to make this place look more professional. Vivian says your home should reflect your aspirations, not your history. Our history is what we built together, I said, feeling something break inside me. Those pictures are our life. Those pictures are embarrassing reminders of when we didn't know any better, he corrected. We need to look forward, not backward. The final insult came when he hired an interior designer without telling me. I came home from a particularly brutal day at work. I'd had to remove 3 children from a home where they weren't safe, and I was emotionally exhausted, to find a stranger in our apartment measuring walls and making notes. Who are you? I asked, confused. Melissa Hartwell, she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Marcus hired me to help elevate the space. Give it a more sophisticated aesthetic. She walked through our apartment with barely concealed disgust, suggesting we needed to replace essentially everything we owned. Marcus followed her around, nodding enthusiastically, agreeing with every criticism. These pieces are very starter home, Melissa said, gesturing at our couch. For someone in Marcus's position, we need furniture that makes a statement. Pieces with provenance. I watched strangers dismiss everything I'd carefully chosen, every small piece of our history together, and Marcus just nodded along like he agreed our entire past was something to be ashamed of. The day he suggested we get rid of our wedding album because the venue wasn't impressive enough, was the day I realized something fundamental. Marcus wasn't just changing. He was trying to erase the version of himself that had loved someone like me. He was rewriting our entire history to fit the narrative Theodore Carmichael had sold him about what success should look like. And I was the biggest obstacle to that fantasy. I should have seen it coming. The signs were everywhere. The designer clothes, the erased photos, the constant criticism. But somehow I still believed we could find our way back to who we used to be. That belief died on a Wednesday night in late September. I'd been working late on a crisis case. A 15-year-old girl named Maya had been removed from her home after her stepfather's arrest for abuse. The paperwork couldn't wait because her emergency placement depended on me filing the right forms before midnight. By the time I finished, my eyes burned from staring at the computer screen and my stomach was growling because I'd skipped dinner. I got home around 9, exhausted and hungry, expecting to find Marcus asleep or watching television. The apartment was dark except for a light coming from our bedroom. I heard his voice before I even put my bag down, sharp and animated in a way that made me pause in the hallway. He was on the phone, pacing based on the sound of his footsteps. His tone carried that false confidence he used with his finance buddies, the voice that was slightly louder and more aggressive than his normal speaking voice. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was just standing there, keys still in my hand, about to announce I was home. Then I heard my name. "I'm serious, Jason. I think I made a massive mistake marrying her." My body went completely still. The keys in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. "She's got this poverty mindset I can't break through," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "No ambition beyond her social worker salary. No understanding of image or presentation. Theodore keeps asking why I'm still with someone so beneath my potential, and honestly, I'm starting to wonder the same thing. I should have walked away. Should have left the apartment, given myself time to process what I was hearing. But my feet wouldn't move. Everyone at the firm has wives who add value to their careers," he said, and I could hear the sneer in his voice. "Sophie detracts from mine. She doesn't network. She doesn't impress anyone. She shows up to events looking like she works at a nonprofit, which I guess she does, but still." He laughed. This cold, cruel sound I'd never heard from him before. Honestly, I could have done so much better. I just didn't realize it until I saw what was actually possible. My dad's right, she's a career liability. I can't build the life I want with someone who thinks shopping at Costco is a personality trait. That word, beneath, hung in the air like poison. "Yeah, I'm thinking about it," Marcus said, responding to something Jason must have asked. "Getting out, I mean. I just need to figure out the timing so it doesn't hurt me politically at the firm. Optics matter, you know? Can't look like I'm unstable or going through personal drama right when partnership decisions are being made." He was planning our divorce like a business transaction, calculating the best timing to discard me without damaging his precious career. I must have made some sound, a sharp intake of breath, a movement, because Marcus suddenly turned and saw me standing in the hallway. His face went completely white. "I have to call you back," he said quickly, hanging up without waiting for Jason's response. We stared at each other across the distance of our bedroom. The silence felt heavy enough to crush me. "How much did you hear?" Marcus asked finally, his voice careful and controlled. "All of it," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He didn't apologize. Didn't scramble to explain or take back the cruelty I'd just heard. Instead, he straightened his shoulders like he was preparing for a performance review, composing himself. "Sophie, you have to understand." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Don't you dare try to rationalize what you just said. I'm under a lot of pressure at work," he started, like that explained everything. "You called me a career liability," I said, each word deliberate. "You said I'm beneath your potential. You're planning our divorce based on what looks best for your career." His jaw tightened. I watched something shift in his expression, the mask dropping, the real contempt showing through. "Because you are," he exploded, all pretense of calm vanishing. "Look at you, Sophie. You're still working a job that barely pays anything, still acting like being humble is some kind of virtue. I'm trying to build something here, and you're dragging me down with your poverty mentality." The cruelty in his voice was almost clinical, like he'd been practicing this speech in his head for months, just waiting for permission to deliver it. "I've supported you through everything," I said, my voice shaking now. "Every promotion, every networking event, every time your parents made me feel like garbage, I stayed. I believed in us." "There is no us," Marcus said flatly. "There's me trying to succeed and you refusing to evolve. You're still the same girl from that nowhere town and you always will be. I need someone who can actually contribute to my future, not anchor me to mediocrity." That was the moment something inside me crystallized. Not heartbreak exactly, but clarity sharp as broken glass. I'd been making myself smaller for this man, apologizing for my background, my career, my values. Trying desperately to become whatever version he wanted while he systematically destroyed everything I was. And he still thought I wasn't good enough. "Then let's make this simple," I said, my voice calm now. "I want a divorce." Marcus actually blinked, genuine surprise crossing his face. He'd expected tears. Expected begging. Expected me to promise I'd change, that I'd be better, that I'd somehow meet his impossible standards. "You're serious?" he asked. "Completely." For the first time in months, I saw uncertainty flicker across his features. Like he'd expected to control this narrative and I'd just rewritten the entire script. "Fine," he finally said, trying to sound indifferent and failing. "If that's what you want." "It is." He grabbed his jacket from the chair, movements jerky and agitated. "I'll stay at my parents' place while we figure out the details." "Good." He paused at the door, and for one brief moment I thought he might apologize. Might recognize what he was losing, what he'd destroyed. Instead he said, "You'll regret this, Sophie. You have no idea how much I was carrying us." I didn't respond. Didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. The door closed behind him and I stood alone in our apartment. The panic I expected didn't come. The tears I thought would drown me stayed locked away. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year: relief. The next few weeks revealed exactly what Marcus's family thought of me. His father hired some shark attorney who tried to paint me as a gold digger taking advantage of Marcus's success. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. We had virtually nothing worth fighting over. No house. No significant savings. Just my student debt and his luxury car lease he couldn't actually afford. His mother called me 3 days after Marcus moved out. Not to ask if I was okay, not to express any concern for my well-being. Just to deliver her verdict. That's when she told me I was a poor investment. That I'd always been too beneath their family's standards. That they were relieved Marcus had finally come to his senses. His father sent an email that was somehow even worse. Cold, businesslike, explaining that I'd always been a liability to Marcus's career trajectory and he was better off cutting his losses early. Even Marcus's brother stopped returning my texts. The whole family closed ranks, rewriting our history to make Marcus the victim and me the opportunist who'd trapped their golden boy. The lawyer meetings were humiliating. Sitting across from Marcus while his attorney suggested I'd manipulated a naive young man, that I'd used marriage to access his family's wealth. Never mind that I'd worked throughout our marriage. Never mind that I'd been the one actually managing our budget while Marcus spent recklessly on cars and clothes and dinners we couldn't afford. They wanted to paint me as the villain in a story where I'd been nothing but supportive. I kept the thrift store furniture, the pieces Marcus had been so ashamed of. He kept his fragile ego and his family's approval. When I finally signed the divorce papers and walked out of that lawyer's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was done shrinking for people who would never see my worth. And I was ready to start rebuilding my life from scratch. The studio apartment I found was in a building that had seen better days. Probably in the 1970s. The elevator broke at least once a month, leaving me to haul groceries up 4 flights of stairs. The walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor's television through the plaster, could track their entire evening routine by sound alone. The place smelled like old carpet and whatever my downstairs neighbor was cooking, which seemed to be cabbage at least 3 nights a week. My bed was literally 10 feet from my stove. I could lie down and see my entire life in one glance. My social work salary barely covered rent and loan payments. After those 2 expenses, I had maybe $300 left for everything else. Groceries, utilities, transportation, everything. I learned to get creative fast. I ate a lot of rice and canned beans. Pasta when I could afford it. I learned which grocery stores marked down their produce on which days and planned my shopping accordingly. The same 5 outfits rotated through my week until the fabric started wearing thin at the elbows and knees. I walked to work when the weather allowed, saving bus fare for rainy days. Some nights I sat on the fire escape, the one luxury of the apartment, a narrow metal platform overlooking an alley, and watched the city move below me. On those nights I'd wonder if I'd made the right choice. If struggling alone was really better than being financially comfortable with Marcus. Then I'd remember his voice on that phone call. The word beneath, delivered with such casual cruelty. The way he'd laughed about me with his friend like I was a mistake he needed to correct. And I'd know I couldn't go back even if I wanted to. Marcus never understood something fundamental about me. I wasn't afraid of struggling. I grew up struggling. I knew how to survive on almost nothing and still wake up with purpose. What I didn't have during our marriage was freedom. Freedom to make my own choices without being criticized for every decision. Freedom to invest in my actual dreams instead of funding his image. Freedom to exist without constant judgment about whether I was good enough, polished enough, wealthy enough. Living in that tiny studio apartment with thin walls and old carpet, I was poor. But I was free. And that freedom was worth more than anything Marcus's money could have bought. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I did something Marcus would have mocked mercilessly. I enrolled in graduate school. Part-time program in nonprofit management and public policy. I paid for it with a patchwork of scholarships I applied for obsessively, additional student loans that made me nauseous to sign, and picking up extra shifts wherever I could find them. My schedule became absolutely brutal. I worked full days at the child welfare agency, left at 5, grabbed whatever food I could eat quickly, and made it to class by 6:30 twice a week. The other nights I studied during my lunch breaks, wrote papers at midnight, survived on coffee and stubborn pride. My classmates were mostly younger, fresh out of undergrad with energy I had to manufacture through sheer willpower. They'd talk about their career plans with this optimistic enthusiasm that made me feel ancient at 29. I was the oldest student in most of my classes. The one who asked practical questions instead of theoretical ones. The one who connected every lecture to real cases I'd actually handled, to families I'd actually tried to help, to systems I'd watched fail people over and over. My professors noticed fast. Dr. Ramirez, who taught nonprofit leadership, started asking me to present case studies in class. To share real examples of what worked and what didn't in the field. Professor Klein invited me to contribute to his research project on trauma-informed care practices. I was exhausted constantly. Some mornings I woke up and genuinely didn't know how I'd make it through the day. But I was also alive in a way I hadn't been in years. I was building something that was entirely mine. Something Marcus couldn't touch or diminish or take credit for. Some nights I fell asleep on my textbooks, woke up with ink smudged on my face from where my cheek had pressed against the pages. I'd stumble to the bathroom and catch sight of myself in the mirror. Hair a mess, mascara smudged, looking absolutely nothing like the polished wife Marcus had wanted. And I'd smile. Because I was becoming something better. Someone with actual expertise. Real credentials. Growing respect in my field. The climb was gradual and often discouraging. Small victories mixed with setbacks that sometimes felt overwhelming. I got promoted to senior caseworker about 8 months after the divorce. It came with more responsibility but barely any increase in pay, maybe $50 more per paycheck. But it meant something. It meant my supervisors recognized my work. I started presenting at local conferences on trauma-informed care. Just small workshops at first, maybe 20 people in a hotel conference room. But I was building a reputation among people who actually valued the work I did, who understood that helping vulnerable families mattered. A nonprofit director named Janet Morse approached me after one of my presentations. She ran a mid-sized organization that placed foster children, and she said my approach to trauma assessment was exactly what her agency needed. "Would you be interested in consulting with us?" she asked. "Redesigning our placement protocols?" The pay was modest, $1,500 for a project that would take me weeks. But it was the first time anyone had paid me for my expertise rather than just my labor. I said yes immediately. That project led to another. And another. I started working weekends on consulting gigs, building a portfolio of real change I'd helped organizations implement. Documented improvements in placement stability. Reduced caseworker burnout. Better outcomes for families. But there were setbacks too. Months where unexpected expenses completely wiped out whatever I'd managed to save. My car broke down in February and I had to choose between fixing it or eating anything other than rice and beans for a month. I chose the car because I needed it to get to my consulting sites. I went without health insurance for 3 months because I simply couldn't afford the premiums. I lived in constant low-level terror of getting sick or injured, of one accident destroying everything I was trying to build. I had a moment of real weakness in April. Sitting in my studio apartment looking at my bank account balance that had dropped below $200, I almost called Marcus. Almost asked if he'd been right. If I really couldn't survive without him. If this whole thing had been a terrible mistake. My finger hovered over his contact in my phone for probably 5 full minutes. Then I called Emma instead. "Tell me I'm not crazy," I said when she answered. "You're not crazy," she said immediately. "You're doing something incredibly hard and you're doing it alone and you're surviving. That's not crazy. That's brave." "I'm exhausted," I admitted. "And scared. And I don't know if I can keep doing this." "You're already doing it," Emma said gently. "Every single day you're doing it. And struggling toward something real beats living comfortably in someone else's contempt. You know that. He was right. I did know that. I didn't call Marcus. The real turning point came in June at a nonprofit leadership summit downtown. I'd submitted a proposal to present on child welfare reform, and somehow it got accepted. I was terrified. This was a much bigger venue than I was used to, with directors from major organizations attending. After my presentation, a woman approached me. She was probably in her 60s, wearing a sharp suit that managed to look both professional and approachable. She had this direct, intense way of looking at people that made me immediately nervous. "I'm Dr. Patricia Holbrook," she said, extending her hand. That was a solid presentation. I knew who she was. Everyone in social services in the region knew who she was. She ran one of the most respected consulting firms, had literally written the book on nonprofit management that I'd been studying in my graduate program. "Thank you," I managed. "Your analysis was excellent," she continued. "But your presentation needs work. You apologized 3 times in the first 5 minutes, and you qualified almost every statement you made. You're undermining your own expertise." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "Have you ever considered starting your own consulting practice?" Dr. Holbrook asked. Actually laughed. "Couldn't help it. I can barely keep myself fed right now. Starting a business seems impossible." Dr. Holbrook didn't laugh. She just looked at me with those intense eyes. "I built my firm from nothing 30 years ago," she said. "I recognize hunger when I see it. Real hunger. The kind that comes from wanting to make actual change, not just collect a paycheck. If you're serious about making real impact, you need to stop thinking small." She handed me her business card. "I'd like to mentor you. No charge. We'll meet monthly. I'll review your work, push you toward bigger goals, introduce you to people who can help. Interested?" I stared at her, genuinely shocked. "Why would you do that?" "Because someone did it for me once," she said simply. "And because you're worth investing in. You just don't know it yet." I took the card with shaking hands. Those monthly meetings with Dr. Holbrook changed everything. Those monthly meetings with Dr. Holbrook changed everything in ways I couldn't have predicted. She taught me how to price my expertise, actually charge what I was worth instead of the apologetic rates I initially proposed that barely covered my time. She taught me how to pitch to organizations, how to walk into a room and present my ideas with confidence instead of constantly qualifying every statement with maybe or I think. Most importantly, she taught me to stop apologizing for taking up space. "You say, sorry, before nearly every statement," she told me during our 3rd meeting. "Stop it. You're not sorry. You have expertise these organizations desperately need. Act like it." She introduced me to nonprofit directors in her network, people who ran organizations with actual budgets and real influence. She'd send emails saying simply, "Sophie Jennings is brilliant. Hire her." And they did. The consulting work grew steadily. Small projects became larger ones. One-time engagements turned into ongoing contracts. I was still working full-time at the child welfare agency, but my evenings and weekends were consumed with consulting work that actually paid well. By the end of my 2nd year in graduate school, I was making more from consulting than from my day job. Dr. Holbrook looked at my numbers during one of our meetings and said, "You're ready." "Ready for what?" "To go out on your own. Launch your firm. Do this full-time." The idea terrified me. Leaving a stable salary felt impossible, reckless, the kind of risk I couldn't afford to take. But Dr. Holbrook pushed. "You're already doing the work. You're just doing it while exhausted from another job that pays you a fraction of your value. Take the leap." 3 years after my divorce, I did. I gave notice at the child welfare agency. My supervisor understood. She'd watched me build my consulting practice and knew I'd outgrown the position. My colleagues threw me a small goodbye party, and I cried because these people had supported me through the worst period of my life. Then I launched Sophie Jennings Consulting, specializing in social services optimization. The first year was absolutely precarious. There were months where I barely broke even, where I lay awake at night wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake leaving stable employment. But slowly, steadily word spread. Organizations I'd helped started sharing my name with their networks. A director whose foster care program I'd redesigned recommended me to her professional association. Another client whose domestic violence shelter I'd helped restructure connected me with a foundation program officer. The work grew organically, built on actual results rather than marketing or connections. I started getting requests from larger nonprofits, then from government agencies looking to evaluate their contracted services, then from foundations wanting to assess whether their grantees were actually effective. The work was meaningful in ways my previous job had never been. I wasn't just processing individual cases anymore. I was helping reshape entire systems, redesigning intake procedures that reduced barriers for families, training staff on trauma-informed approaches that actually worked, implementing data systems that showed what was actually helping people. And the pay was significant. More than I'd ever imagined making in social services. I moved out of the studio apartment with thin walls into a real one-bedroom with big windows that let in actual natural light. The first morning I woke up there, sunlight streaming across my bed, I actually cried. I bought furniture I loved. Not expensive designer pieces that would impress anyone, just things that made me happy. A comfortable couch in deep blue. Bookshelves for all the books I'd been storing in boxes. A kitchen table where I could actually spread out and work. I started traveling. Not to luxury resorts or impressive destinations, but to places I'd always wanted to see. I hiked in national parks, explored small coastal towns, visited historical sites. I went on my terms at my pace, answering to nobody. For the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely free. The professional recognition came gradually, then all at once. In my 4th year of business, I was invited to speak at a national conference on child welfare reform. Not a small workshop, a keynote presentation to an audience of hundreds. I was terrified. Stood backstage with sweating palms and a racing heart, convinced I'd forget everything the moment I stepped into the lights. But when I walked out and started talking about trauma-informed systemic change, something shifted. I wasn't Sophie who apologized for existing anymore. I was Sophie who knew exactly what she was talking about and wasn't afraid to say it. The presentation got a standing ovation. Afterward, a dozen organizations lined up to ask about my availability. A major foundation invited me to join their advisory board, consulting on how they distributed millions in social services grants. I published articles in professional journals that practitioners actually cited in their work. Universities started inviting me to guest lecture. One university offered me an adjunct position teaching nonprofit management, the same field where I'd been the struggling older student just years before. I taught one class per semester, sharing real-world experience with students who reminded me of my younger self. Local media did a profile on my firm. The reporter highlighted the measurable improvements we'd helped organizations achieve: placement stability rates that increased by 40%, staff retention that improved dramatically, families actually getting help instead of falling through bureaucratic cracks. But the recognition that mattered most came from the frontline workers. Caseworkers who told me the changes I'd helped implement made their impossible jobs slightly more possible. Counselors who said they could actually focus on helping people instead of just managing paperwork. Advocates who felt like the system was finally supporting them instead of fighting them. I wasn't famous or wealthy by Marcus's standards. But I was respected by people whose opinions actually mattered to me. The external success was visible and measurable. But the internal transformation ran even deeper. I started noticing how different I felt in my own skin. Walking into meetings with confidence instead of apology. Stating my rates without flinching or immediately offering a discount. Disagreeing with powerful people when I knew I was right. I stopped monitoring every word for potential criticism. Stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. Stopped apologizing for taking up space in rooms where I'd earned my seat. I joined a gym, not to achieve some ideal body that would make me more acceptable, but because I wanted to feel strong. And I did feel strong physically and emotionally. I could see the difference in how I carried myself, how I moved through the world. I cut my hair short in a style Marcus would have absolutely hated. He'd always insisted I keep it long, said short hair on women wasn't feminine. I loved it. Felt like myself for the first time in years. I wore clothes that felt authentic to who I was. Professional but real, competent without performing wealth I didn't actually have or want. I started saying no to things that didn't serve me. Opportunities that looked impressive but felt wrong. People who wanted my expertise for free. Relationships that required me to be smaller than I was. And I started saying yes to things that scared me. Speaking engagements that felt too big. Projects that stretched my abilities. Opportunities that forced me to grow. I dated occasionally. Nothing serious yet, but enough to remember what it felt like to be with men who appreciated strength instead of feeling threatened by it. Men who asked about my work with genuine interest instead of dismissing it as depressing. Men who saw me as an equal instead of a liability. The most profound change was entirely internal. I stopped waiting for permission to value myself. I stopped needing external validation to know I was enough. Stopped measuring my worth by other people's standards. Stopped believing that anyone else's opinion of me mattered more than my own. Emma visited my apartment on a Saturday in October, almost exactly 5 years after my divorce. She walked through rooms filled with light, looked at furniture I'd chosen myself, saw the framed degrees and professional awards on my walls. She actually teared up. "What?" I asked, concerned. "Nothing bad," she said quickly, wiping her eyes. "Just look at this place, Sophie. Look at your life. Do you even realize what you've done?" We made dinner together that night. Real food, ingredients I'd bought because I wanted them, not because they were on sale. We drank wine I'd chosen because I liked it, not because it was the cheapest option. "You've become everything he said you couldn't be," Emma said, raising her glass. "And you did it completely on your own." I hadn't thought about it in exactly those terms, but she was right. Marcus had said I had no ambition beyond my social worker salary. I'd built a successful consulting firm that employed 6 people and served clients across 3 states. He'd said I didn't understand image or presentation. I now advised organizations on professional development and strategic positioning. He'd said I was beneath his potential. I'd risen to a level where my expertise was sought by organizations he'd never access, doing work that actually mattered. But the real victory wasn't matching his standards. It was realizing his standards had been meaningless all along. I'd built a life based on impact, not image. Success measured by families helped, not restaurants where I was recognized. Worth determined by integrity, not designer labels. "To proving that leaving him was the best decision you ever made," Emma said. I raised my glass and clinked it against hers. To remembering I never needed his approval in the first place. We drank to that. And it tasted like freedom. That toast with Emma, celebrating the life I'd built entirely on my own terms, felt like closure on a chapter I'd finally finished writing. I thought about Marcus occasionally, usually when something reminded me of our marriage, but he felt distant. Like someone I'd known in another lifetime. Then about 2 months later, my phone rang while I was reviewing a grant proposal for a client. The name on the screen made me pause. Jessica Morrison, a friend from college I hadn't spoken to in over a year. "Sophie," she said when I answered, her voice carrying that breathless quality of someone with juicy gossip. "I have news about Marcus. Thought you'd want to know." My stomach tightened reflexively, but I kept my voice neutral. "Okay. Theodore Carmichael got arrested." I sat up straighter. "What?" "Federal investigators," Jessica continued, clearly enjoying this. "Massive securities fraud scheme. Theodore had been running this sophisticated operation for years, defrauding investors of millions. It all came crashing down last week." I processed this information slowly. Theodore, the man Marcus had worshipped, the idol he'd reshaped his entire life to emulate, was a criminal. "The whole firm's imploding," Jessica went on. "The investigation expanded to include other senior partners. They're declaring bankruptcy. Mass layoffs. And Marcus," she paused for effect. "Marcus was on the list." "He lost his job," I said, not quite a question. "Fired without severance, without references. His entire career trajectory just destroyed because he tied himself so completely to Theodore. He posted this vague thing on social media about unexpected transitions and exciting new opportunities, but everyone knows it's over for him. I should have felt something, satisfaction maybe, or vindication. Instead, I just felt oddly empty. "There's more," Jessica said. "Marcus's dad's firm took hits too. They had business connections to Theodore's operation. Not criminally charged or anything, but their reputations damaged. Lost some major clients. The family that had looked down on me, that had called me a poor investment, was facing their own consequences." "Thanks for telling me," I said. "I figured you'd want to know," Jessica replied. "After everything he put you through." We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I sat there with my phone in my hand, trying to examine my feelings. Was I happy about Marcus's downfall? Sad? Vindicated? Mostly I just felt distant from it all. Like this was happening to someone I used to know, not someone who still had any real connection to my life. Over the following months, I heard fragments of Marcus's unraveling through various connections. Jessica called again a few weeks later with updates. The luxury car had been repossessed. The designer clothes were showing up on resale websites. Someone she knew had recognized a suit Marcus used to wear to networking events, now being sold for a fraction of what he'd paid. The expensive apartment he'd moved into after our divorce, the one he'd furnished to impress people like Theodore, became unaffordable. He was evicted for unpaid rent. His social media presence, which had been all polished photos from networking events and expensive restaurants, went completely silent for months. When he finally posted again, it was vague inspirational quotes about resilience and reinvention that fooled nobody. He moved back in with his parents, Jessica reported during one of her update calls. But apparently that's not going well. They're furious with him. Why? I asked despite myself. They blame him for not seeing Theodore's fraud coming. For being too starstruck to question his mentor. For embarrassing the family with his failed career. Classic Whitfield behavior. Never their fault, always someone else's. I thought about his mother's phone call during our divorce. The ice in her voice when she called me a poor investment. Wondered if she saw the irony now. Marcus eventually moved out of his parents' place into a sublet in Queens. Working contract finance gigs that paid a fraction of his former salary, taking whatever work he could find while his professional reputation remained tainted by association with the scandal. A former colleague of Marcus's, someone I'd met a few times at firm events, reached out via email. He said Marcus was going through a difficult time, and asked if I knew, implying I should feel some obligation to check on my ex-husband. I responded politely that I hoped Marcus figured things out, but that I wasn't the appropriate person to offer support. Another mutual friend mentioned seeing Marcus at a coffee shop in Midtown, looking worn down and older than his years, working on a laptop with the desperate energy of someone trying to rebuild from nothing. He looked rough, the friend said. Like he'd aged 10 years. Jessica reported that Marcus had been reaching out to people from our college days trying to reconnect. Presumably networking for opportunities, trying to rebuild connections he'd abandoned when they weren't useful to his climb. He asked about you, she said during one call. My hand tightened on the phone. What did he ask? What you were doing now? Whether you'd remarried? If you were still doing social work? Jessica's tone made it clear she'd caught the condescension in that last question. The phrasing told me everything I needed to know. Marcus couldn't imagine I'd succeeded without him. Couldn't conceive that the wife he'd deemed beneath his potential had actually risen while he fell. He still thought of me as the struggling social worker he'd left behind. Had no idea I'd built something far more successful than he'd ever achieved. I felt no satisfaction in his suffering. But I felt no sympathy either. He'd built his entire identity on impressing people who didn't care about him. Measured his worth by metrics that proved completely meaningless when tested. Chosen image over substance, status over character, Theodore's approval over his own integrity. Now he was facing the consequences of those choices. During one of my monthly meetings with Dr. Holbrook, I mentioned Marcus's situation. I expected her to say something about karma or justice, about him getting what he deserved. Instead, she said something that shifted my entire perspective. His fall isn't your victory, Sophie. I looked at her surprised. Your victory happened the moment you chose to build something real instead of chasing his approval, she continued. His circumstances now are just proof that the life he wanted was always unsustainable. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those intense eyes that never missed anything. People like Marcus and Theodore build castles on sand. Impressive from a distance but no foundation to weather storms. The real test of success isn't whether you can climb when everything's going well. It's whether you've built something sustainable enough to weather inevitable challenges. I thought about my firm, my reputation, my relationships. All built on actual value. On helping people. On expertise earned through real struggle. Your work can't be taken away by market crashes or scandal or shifting social circles, Dr. Holbrook said. Because it's built on substance. On real impact. That's the difference between you and him. She paused, then added more gently. He'll probably reach out eventually. Men like him often circle back to women they discarded when their new lives fall apart. I won't respond, I said immediately. Good. But when it happens, remember clearly who you've become and what you've overcome. Your success was never about proving him wrong. It was about proving to yourself that you never needed his validation in the first place. I nodded, feeling something settle inside me. Marcus's downfall wasn't my victory because I'd already won. Not by watching him fall, but by building something real while he was too busy performing success to actually achieve it. I went back to my work, to my clients, to the life I'd created from absolutely nothing. And I waited, knowing Dr. Holbrook was probably right. Eventually Marcus would reach out. And when he did, I'd be ready. Dr. Holbrook was right. 6 months after I first heard about Marcus's downfall, the message came. I was reviewing a contract proposal when my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. I almost ignored it. I got dozens of connection requests and messages daily from people wanting to network or pitch their services. But the name stopped me cold. Marcus Whitfield. My stomach clenched involuntarily, muscle memory from years of anxiety around him. I opened the message. Sophie, I hope you're well. I know it's been a long time. I've been going through some changes and would really appreciate the chance to talk. Coffee sometime? Marcus. Professional. Distant. Like we were former colleagues instead of divorced spouses who'd torn each other apart. I stared at that message for a long time, cursor hovering over the delete button. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, let him sit in the uncertainty of whether I'd even seen it, whether I cared enough to respond. But curiosity won. Not about reconciliation, that ship had sailed and sunk years ago. But I was curious about what version of himself he'd present. Whether he'd learned anything. Whether he'd actually changed or just wanted something from me. I responded simply, there's a coffee shop near my office. Thursday at 2 p.m. works for me. Neutral. Professional. On my turf, my schedule, my terms. The days leading up to Thursday, I examined my own motivations carefully. Was I going to gloat? To finally tell him everything I'd held back during our divorce? To rub my success in his face? I realized I didn't want any of those things. I wanted to see if the man who'd called me beneath his potential could recognize what I'd become. And more importantly, I wanted to prove to myself that his opinion no longer had any power over me. Thursday came. I dressed in my usual work clothes, tailored pants and a silk blouse, professional but comfortable. The kind of outfit that said I had my life together without trying too hard to prove anything. I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early, ordered my usual latte, and claimed a table near the window where natural light poured in. Pulled out my laptop and worked on actual business while I waited, feeling completely calm. When Marcus walked through the door at exactly 2 o'clock, I barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by business casual that looked worn around the edges. Khakis that had seen better days. A button-down that was wrinkled despite obvious efforts to press it. The confident swagger he used to carry, that performance of success he'd perfected, had been replaced by something hollow. He looked older. Not just the 5 years that had passed, but worn down by struggle in a way he'd never experienced before. Gray threads in his hair that hadn't been there during our marriage. Lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. He spotted me and approached, his smile uncertain. Sophie. Thanks for meeting me. Of course, I said neutrally, closing my laptop. He sat down across from me. Ordered a regular coffee when the barista came by. Black, no additions. I noticed because Marcus used to order elaborate drinks, the kind with multiple modifications that announced he had particular tastes. We exchanged awkward pleasantries about the weather, about traffic, about nothing that mattered. Then he cleared his throat and got to it. I know I don't deserve your time, he started, and I immediately noted the opening. Positioning himself as humble, reformed, worthy of sympathy. But I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. The way I treated you. The things I said. I was completely lost, chasing something that didn't even matter. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. Just gave him silence to fill. He continued, words tumbling out like he'd rehearsed this. I lost my job when the firm collapsed. Lost most of my savings in investments that went bad. My parents are furious with me, we barely speak now. I'm living in a sublet in Queens, working contract gigs just to stay afloat. He looked at me with eyes that expected sympathy. Maybe even rescue. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said evenly, offering nothing more. His face flickered with something, disappointment maybe, that I wasn't immediately rushing to comfort him. It's been really hard, he pressed. I've had a lot of time to think. About my choices. About what I threw away. Home, I said, taking another sip of coffee. I've been thinking about us a lot, Marcus said, leaning forward slightly. About how stable things were when we were together. How you always kept me grounded. How you made everything feel manageable. Here it comes, I thought. I think I made a huge mistake letting you go, he said, his voice dropping to something that might have been sincerity. We were good together, Sophie. We could be again. There was not an apology for hurting me. Not genuine remorse for his cruelty. Just a request for me to fix his current problem. You didn't let me go, Marcus, I said calmly. I left you. Because you told me I was beneath you. He winced at the direct language. I was an idiot. I know that now. I was caught up in all the wrong things, measuring success by the wrong standards. But I've changed. I see things differently now. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just a mild, distant pity for someone who still fundamentally didn't understand what had gone wrong. Marcus, you haven't changed, I said gently. You're just broke. There's a difference. His face flushed red. That's not fair. Isn't it? Kept my voice even. You didn't want me when you thought you were climbing. You called me a career liability. Said I was beneath your potential. Now that you've fallen, suddenly you remember I exist? That's not growth. That's desperation. I'm trying to apologize. I don't need your apology, I interrupted, still gentle but firm. I needed it 5 years ago when you were telling your friend I dragged you down with my poverty mentality. No. I'm good. So that's it. His voice rose slightly, desperation creeping in. You're just going to act like everything's perfect for you now? I smiled and I meant it. I'm not acting. My life is good, Marcus. I have work I love. Financial stability. Peace. I built all of that after you told me I was too poor to understand real ambition. I watched realization cross his face. The understanding that I wasn't the same woman he'd left behind. That I had grown far beyond the version of me he thought he knew. What are you doing now? He asked, and I heard genuine curiosity mixed with disbelief. I run my own consulting firm. We work with nonprofits and government agencies on social services optimization. It's meaningful work and it pays well. His eyes widened slightly. I could see him processing this, trying to reconcile it with his mental image of me struggling alone. That's great, he said, stumbling over the words. Really? I'm happy for you. But his eyes said something different. They said he'd expected to find me struggling, that some part of him had needed me to be worse off without him. Do you ever think about what we could have built together? He tried one more angle. If we'd both tried harder? And there it was, rewriting history again. Pretending our marriage failed from mutual neglect rather than his contempt. We didn't both fail, Marcus, I said clearly. You decided I wasn't good enough for the life you wanted. You chose Theodore's approval over our marriage. You called me beneath you. I paused. I chose not to spend my life shrinking for someone who couldn't see my worth. I stood up, gathering my laptop and bag, ending the meeting on my terms. I genuinely hope you figure things out, Marcus. I mean that. But I can't be part of that process. As I walked toward the door, he called after me, I really am sorry, Sophie. For all of it. I paused, looked back at him sitting alone at that coffee shop table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I believe you are, I said. I hope you find what you're looking for. Then I walked out into the bright afternoon, feeling lighter with every step. I'd faced the man who once made me feel worthless, and I'd felt nothing but peace. That more than anything else told me I'd truly moved on. Walking out of that coffee shop, leaving Marcus sitting alone with his regrets and his desperation, I felt something settle into place. A final piece of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. I didn't go back to my office right away. Instead I walked. Just wandered through the city for a while, letting the afternoon sun warm my face. Watching people rush past with their own stories and struggles and triumphs. I thought about the woman I'd been 7 years ago. The one who'd stood in the hallway of that cramped apartment, listening to her husband call her beneath his potential. The one who'd sat alone signing divorce papers while his mother delivered her ice-cold verdict about being a poor investment. That woman felt like someone I used to know. Someone I cared about and felt protective of, but not someone I was anymore. My life now is built on foundations Marcus never understood existed. I run a consulting firm that employs 6 people, all women from working-class backgrounds who remind me of younger versions of myself. Women who were told social work was a poverty profession, that caring about people wouldn't pay the bills, that they should choose more practical careers. We work with nonprofits across 3 states, helping them redesign programs to actually serve people instead of just checking bureaucratic boxes. Last year, we helped implement trauma-informed practices in foster care agencies across 2 counties. The results were measurable. Placement stability for kids improved by 38%. Children staying in homes longer, experiencing less disruption, having better outcomes. We redesigned a domestic violence shelter's intake process that increased survivor retention by 40%. Women who used to fall through the cracks were now getting help, staying safe, rebuilding their lives. We trained caseworkers in 3 counties on approaches that reduced their burnout rates and improved family outcomes. People who were ready to quit the field entirely found renewed purpose and better tools to actually help. The work is meaningful in ways Marcus's finance career never was. We can point to specific children who stayed in stable placements longer. Specific families who got help instead of falling through systemic cracks. Specific people whose lives are tangibly better because of our expertise. My income is substantial enough that I don't worry anymore. Not about rent or groceries or unexpected expenses. I have savings that actually grow instead of drain. Retirement accounts. Health insurance without gaps. Stability I built entirely on my own. I live in an apartment I'm genuinely proud of. Big windows that let in natural light. Furniture that reflects my taste rather than someone else's judgment. Books everywhere because I love reading. Plants that somehow I manage to keep alive. Space that feels like home instead of performance. I travel when I want. Nothing extravagant, but to places I've dreamed of seeing. I spent a week hiking in Utah last spring. Visited Portland in the fall just because I'd always wanted to see it. Planning a trip to the North Carolina coast next month. I'm building the life Marcus said I was too limited to imagine. And I'm doing it without him, without his approval, without his validation. I've taken on Dr. Holbrook's role for younger women entering the field. 3 graduate students currently work with me as paid interns. Not exploited free labor, but actual paid positions where they learn consulting skills while getting exposed to work that matters. I mentor women from backgrounds like mine. First-generation college students who are working multiple jobs to stay in school. Scholarship kids who know the weight of being the first in their family to get a degree. Daughters of construction workers and house cleaners and factory workers who were told their compassion wouldn't translate into a career. I teach them what Dr. Holbrook taught me, that compassion is expertise. That helping people is valuable work. That they can build sustainable careers doing meaningful things. One of my former interns, Maria, just launched her own practice specializing in immigrant family services. Another, Keisha, got hired to direct a major nonprofit's children's division at age 27. A third, Jennifer, is pursuing her doctorate researching trauma-informed policy at the state level. When they thank me, when they tell me I changed their trajectory, I think about the version of myself that Marcus tried to diminish. The woman he said had no ambition beyond her social worker salary. I'm building something that will outlast me. Not a legacy of impressive dinner parties or designer clothes or the right restaurant reservations. But actual improvement in how we serve vulnerable people. And a generation of practitioners who know their worth isn't measured by others' approval. The personal transformation runs even deeper than professional success. I have relationships now built on mutual respect instead of performance. Friends who value who I am, not what I can offer them or how I make them look. People who show up when things are hard, not just when it's convenient. I date occasionally. Nothing serious yet, but I've learned what it feels like to be with men who appreciate strength instead of feeling threatened by it. Men who ask about my work with genuine interest instead of dismissing it as depressing. Men who see me as an equal instead of a liability. I've reconnected with parts of myself I'd abandoned during my marriage. I volunteer again at the same shelter where Marcus and I first met, sorting donations and helping families. Not for resume building or networking, but because it reminds me why this work matters. I read for pleasure now instead of just professional development. Fiction that takes me to other worlds. Poetry that makes me feel things. Memoirs that remind me everyone's carrying their own weight. I laugh more. Worry less. Sleep better. I look at old photos from my marriage sometimes. The ones I rescued from that drawer where Marcus had hidden them. I barely recognized that woman who made herself smaller to fit his shrinking vision of who I should be. But I'm not angry at her. I'm grateful she found the strength to leave. The apartment where I overheard Marcus call me beneath his potential is gone, replaced by a home that's entirely mine. The person who believed his assessment of my worth is gone too, replaced by someone who knows her value comes from within. Marcus is a chapter in my life now. A painful one that taught me exactly who I never want to be and what I never want to accept. I don't hate him. I genuinely don't. I don't need him to fail. His suffering gives me no joy. If he somehow turned his life around tomorrow, it would cause me no pain. He simply doesn't occupy space in my emotional life anymore. When I think about our marriage, I mostly feel sad for the years I wasted trying to be enough for someone who was determined to find me lacking. But I'm grateful too. Grateful that his cruelty became obvious enough that I couldn't ignore it. Grateful that he pushed for divorce before I wasted more years. Grateful that his eventual fall happened without me attached to it. The revenge I got wasn't planned or intentional. I didn't orchestrate his downfall. I didn't even celebrate it when it happened. The revenge was simply this. I became everything he said I couldn't be. I built the life he claimed I was too limited to imagine. And I did it completely without him. I proved to myself, not to him but to myself, that I was never the problem. His standards were the problem. His values were empty. His vision was hollow. Real worth isn't measured by who you impress at galas or what designer labels you wear or which expensive restaurants recognize your name. It's measured by the impact you make, the people you help, the integrity you maintain when nobody's watching, the life you build that reflects who you actually are instead of who you're performing to be. I don't need Marcus to understand that. I don't need his apology or his recognition or his regret. I just needed to prove it to myself. And I did. That evening, I sat in my apartment as the sun set, casting golden light through my big windows. I poured myself a glass of wine. Good wine, the kind I bought because I liked it, not because it would impress anyone. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Dinner this weekend? I smiled and texted back, absolutely. Then I opened my laptop and looked at my schedule for the week ahead. Client meetings. A presentation at a regional conference. Interviews for a new position at my firm. A mentorship lunch with Maria. A full life. A meaningful life. A life built entirely on my own terms. I raised my glass to the empty room, to the woman I used to be and the woman I'd become. To freedom, I said quietly. And I meant it. If this story of quiet triumph had you rooting for Sophie from start to finish, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sophie walked out of that coffee shop, leaving Marcus sitting alone with his regrets.